Hey everyone, how's it going? Yeah? So it's story hour. You can just kick back and I'll tell you a story, and hopefully if I do it right, you won't even you won't even realize that you're learning something till it's done at the end, just be by accident. So I often get asked where I learned to tell a story. And that answer always comes very easy to me without reaching. I learned to tell a story at my grandmother's kitchen table. I can picture it right now in my head. All my memories appear in my head like circa 1975 Technicolor prints. Remember those with the rounded corners? Anyone? Red rose tea in a chipped brown Betty teapot with Pacific evaporated canned milk and sugar cubes right out of the Rogers box. On the burnt orange Formica countertop, you remember? Ashtrays, remember the good old days when you could smoke inside? Ashtrays brimming with smoked right to the filter, Export A, regulars and longer, crumpled number 7 menthol butts, marked with my grandmother's and my auntie's lipstick. There was Molson Canadian and Old Stock stubby beer bottles and rum and cokes, sometimes a rye and ginger on the rocks if you wanted to get fancy about it. And my uncles, they would tap the ash from their smokes. Do you remember that? I used to think it was so cool. Now I'm like, that is so gross, but whatever. They'd tap the ash from their smokes onto the thighs of their jeans, rub it in with calloused palms. The ladies would all half listen to their kids complain about who punched who first or who wasn't sharing what, and then send us all back outside to play ball hockey in the driveway. All of this under a halo of cigarette smoke and the hockey game on the CBC in the living room. And always in my family, there were stories. That's where I learned it. Always a never-ending stream of stories, never-ending and overlapping, interrupting and arguing with each other stories. I was the oldest of my generation. I would hang around the periphery, too old to play hide and seek anymore, but too young to have anything much to say, so I'd just listen. And that's how I learned my family history, our legends, and our lies. Tell us the one about how would you know? You weren't even there. You were too young to really remember, but that's not what happened at all. And don't listen to that guy. He's always been full of shit. Oh, my God. You remind me of your father when you do that. Remember that time? I do not recall now whose bright idea it was in the first place, but man, you are the spitting image. It sounds crazy, but it's true. I swear to you, it runs in the family. And whenever anyone ever asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up, I would say an underwater biologist. I have no idea why. What I really wanted to be was just like my dad, the welder, or my Uncle Rob, the electrician, holding court at the kitchen table, punctuating their sentences with a wave or a stab of their cigarette. Punchlines followed by long pulls on their drink, applause measured in decibels and table slaps, chapters marked by someone spilling something and someone rushing in with a wet tea towel before the new tablecloth got ruined. And I just remember wanting to be that, except that was not a job. Storytelling was just something you did with your family until you had to get up and drag your ass back into work on Monday morning. Ironic now, yeah, that the very same family that taught me everything I know about telling stories took so long to understand just what it actually is that I do for a living. So weird, right? My grandma Flo, she one time told me that a job wasn't really a job unless you hated it. That would be funnier to me now if that had not been the biggest truth in her life, and if that truth hadn't bent her back and blown out her knees and curled her arthritic fingertips back into her palms, like permanently. I'm a storyteller. Weird, right? This is what I do for a job. Sometimes the reality of this astounds me, and I never, not once, ever stop feeling blessed. Before my other grandma, Patricia, before she passed away in May of 2017, I always used to call her from the road, especially when I was in a new city I'd never been to before. And the conversation always went something like this. She always yelled into the phone, especially a cell phone, especially if I was far away. Like, she felt like she had to yell louder the farther away I was. But anyway, she would always say, "Where did you say you were?" And I would say, hi, Grandma, I'm in Berlin or Saskatoon or Yellowknife or Winnipeg or New York City or maybe Prince George. And she would say, "And what are you doing there?" I would say, "I have a gig." I'd always tell her that. A gig. For some reason, this word gig infuriated her. Then she would ask, What do you mean? You have like a reading?" And I'd say, "Yeah, it's sort of like a reading." And this was always followed by the very same question. "Who pays for all this? They pay you, they fly you there, they pay you to talk? Then you tell me, where do I sign up for that job?" This seems like a good time to thank Irene Lanzinger and Aaron Neckman and the officers of the BCFED, Angela Boscario, Sylvia Brown, Stephen Howard, for having me. So I never forget how lucky I am, hey? I come from a working family, no, to be totally serious. I come from a working family. I never forget how lucky I am. Even when I drag my suitcase, all full of books, back up 4 flights of stairs and fall onto the couch all dog-tired and road-sick and lonely, and the milk in the fridge all gone sour. I listened to that Farron record. Do you remember Farron, the lesbian folk singer? Is there any? Where's the librarians? You remember. Anyways, when I get home from the road, I listen to that Farron record. She's such a good storyteller in her own right. I put on that song. Do you know the one 15 years ago I worked the line? With 1,000 more all doing time while the foreman smiled, complicit crime. We were strangers to the plan. And an old woman, she ran the gear, she couldn't move. They said she'd been there 40 years, and I think that's rude because 40 years is 40 years, and I was only 15 then. And the work waged war upon our backs, and we gauged our steps, and we didn't look slack. One day, that old woman, she didn't come back. I couldn't work so well, so they let me go. And I don't forget about the factory. I don't expect this ride to always be. Can I give you what you want to see? Will we do it one more time? I listened to that song and I remember the power of simple words. And I remember to always be grateful for the honor that is this stage, this microphone, this voice, and all of your ears. So let me tell you a story, if I may. So a few years ago, I got invited to come and perform at a storytelling festival in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, and a very nice woman in a beat-up Honda Civic hatchback. Here's the deal. People who drive beat-up Honda Civic hatchbacks make shit happen. I guarantee you that behind this event right now, there's probably a whole bunch of women driving beat-up, shitty, brown Honda Civic hatchbacks. Just making sure everything's happening on time. Anyways, she picked me up at the airport. She dropped me off outside of the dormitories at this university campus. She told me to just go in and check in at the front desk. So what had happened was the festival had contracted all of the accommodations for all of its performers out to the university, and the university created a list. And the festival created a list, sent it off to the university, and the housing people, they took that list of performers and they provided rooms for them, dorm rooms for each performer, booked, I guess, based on the assumed gender of that person. And I guess they figured out the assumed gender of that person. They determined that, I suppose, by the name of said performer. Just looking back, that's what I think happened. And so I think that's how Ivan Coyote, That's how I ended up residing for 3 nights in a men's dormitory in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, during the very same week as a Christian evangelical basketball tournament was happening on the very same campus. True story. I had a tiny little dorm room. My room was so small I had to close the closet door to open the door to the hallway. Metaphor, I don't know, you decide. That hallway led straight, metaphor, I don't know, you decide, to the giant washroom in the men's dormitory I was expected to shower in with 100 or so 6-foot tall evangelical Christian athletes of the decidedly male variety. I'm pretty sure if you took out your pocket computer and Googled trans people's nightmares right now, some version of this type of scenario would pop up in a top 10 list on BuzzFeed or some shit like that. In case anyone is wondering, because it's hard to tell from up here, especially since I forgot my spectacles on the kitchen table, but it's hard to tell from up here. Are any of you wondering? I don't know. I can't tell in the back. I guess I'll explain that I was assigned female at birth, and now I identify as kind of a non-binary trans person. I present as, I don't know, masculine of center, I guess, for lack of a better word. And when out in public, I'm most usually sporting some version of how I'm dressed right now, just because I try to be dressed whenever I'm out in public, you know, just as a courtesy. Something I think we should all do. Anyways. So if I'm fully dressed, which, like I say, I usually try to do, I can, most of the time when I'm out in public, I can just use if there's no gender neutral option available, which is most of the time, I can just use the stall in the men's room. That's what I do. Because of the fact that in my limited experience, most dudes don't even make eye contact with each other in the men's bathroom for some reason. For the most part, no one bothers me in there. I don't ever feel safe, though, I'll tell you that. Largely due to a lifetime of previous hassles in women's bathrooms, and I might not actually be safe in there if I got clocked by the wrong person as trans, especially lately, you know, with what's his name and stuff. But this is what I do. I think they call it the lesser of two evils, yeah? But this loophole, this use the men's stall loophole in the back, that doesn't apply when it comes to stripping down naked and showering in a giant tiled room full of teenage boys from rural Saskatchewan. So, and I guess I should mention that this all happened before I had top surgery, also otherwise known as a radical double mastectomy for the hospital employee union folks. Of course, you know the technical term is lobotomy. Anyways, my point being is that at the time I looked like, well, I guess I looked like me, except slightly less wrinkly. From the neck up, but from the neck down, like naked, I still possessed quite an exceptional rack. Yeah, not to brag, but having bound down my chest since my early 20s, gravity having not had one waking vertical moment upon which to act upon them, if I do say so myself, at the time I still had this pretty fantastic set of breasts on me. And I'm pretty sure they would have made quite a splash. Whoo, can I go there? Just did. Were I to have paraded them around the men's shower room in that particular crowd of sort of lonely rural farm boys from Saskatchewan. Anyway, too much information? Just wait, because guess what? Because then, of course, there was the whole, like, I don't have a dangling participle situation to contend with as well, so call me cynical. Call me chicken even, should you dare. I just didn't foresee this whole naked giant shower thing situation going my way, so I just went back downstairs. I asked to be moved, please, to the women's dormitory, and I was informed by the somewhat confused but very nice young fellow who was working at the front desk that all of the rooms on all of the dorms on the entire campus were full for the entire weekend due to a giant holy basketball tournament that they were having, and that there was simply nowhere else for them to put me, yeah? So he kindly guarded the door at the bathroom on my floor for me while I went in and did my business, brushed my teeth, and I went to bed thinking I was, as my gran said, used to say, just sort it all out the next day, eh? Get a good sleep, sort it all out the next day, eh? Anyways, so sorting it all out the next day meant that for every morning for the next 3 days, I got up and I walked 11 minutes. I timed it, 11 minutes over across the campus, over to the women's dormitories, and I waited, like not in a creepy way. I wasn't hiding in the shrubberies or anything like that at all. I'll have you know, I was just standing outside, and I would just wait until someone came out of one of the locked doors, and then I would sneak upstairs into the women's bathrooms where, at least, the showers had their own little stalls for some reason, which brings me to the vaguely homoerotic for me question of why is it, maybe some of the building trades people can enlighten me afterwards, why is it, it's one of the great questions of life, why is it that presumably straight and sometimes homophobic dudes regularly design and build buildings so that they have to shower in one giant naked room together? Always wondered. Apparently only women and girls are allowed or permitted any modicum of privacy when bathing, but perhaps that's another keynote altogether. But, you know, no offense, but straight people, you can be so weird sometimes, right? Anyway, I was somehow able to sneak into a shower stall, get cleaned up. I only got screamed at by packs of teenaged athletic Christian girl gangs maybe 3 or 4 times during those 3 or 4 days while I was ducking in and out of the shower stall, bolting for whichever door I happened to be bolting for, you know, depending on which direction I was. There was a lot of bolting around in there is what I'm saying. A lot of bolting, and you could at this time make the argument that perhaps sneaking in the back doors of single-gender residencies while being trans and looking like me and bolting around inside of women's bathrooms and change rooms is kind of a heat score. And it only invites further scrutiny. And you would get no argument from me on this. So, anyway, I think I've made my point pretty clear here. It was an uncomfortable and sometimes even scary 4 days and 3 nights for me, and I was a full-grown adult at the time. And I tell this story so you can understand what it feels like to be me. I tell this story sometimes when I go into so-called public schools. And when I do, I ask teachers and principals to please imagine a semester of that. I ask them to imagine an undergraduate degree of that. I ask them to imagine trying to get through all of grade 9 like that. Would you make it to graduation, I ask them, especially if your mental health depended at all on staying physically healthy and participating in any kind of sport or recreational activity. But because this is a labor conference, I will tell you that if your members, if any of your rank and file workers are ever required to shower or get changed into a uniform or work gear at their mill or factory or warehouse or mine, or use a bathroom at any point in their shift, if gender-neutral facilities are not provided, then what this means for most, if not all, trans and non-binary workers is that they are not considered worthy of employment at that facility. If we do not immediately address this, what you are telling us, what you're telling my community, my people, is that our most basic needs in terms of bottom line human dignity, such as using a bathroom or getting changed for work, are not worth meeting, that we simply do not matter enough, and that we are functionally unemployable there. And this bathroom and washroom thing, it's getting better and worse at the same time, if you ask me. I've seen a lot more gender-neutral facilities in all of my travels. I just got back from 9 cities in 8 countries in Southeast Asia on Monday night. I was there in the month of November. I'm seeing a lot more gender-neutral facilities in all of my travels, but the news is also full of hatred and bigotry right now, as state after state in the United States is putting forth and sometimes passing ridiculous and impossible to enforce bathroom bills that would make it illegal and punishable by law for me to use any public bathroom other than the one that matches the birth sex on my birth certificate. But how safe do you think I would be? How safe do you think I would be dressed like this in the ladies' room anywhere in North Carolina or Alabama or Texas right now, even if their bathroom bills were overturned? How about especially because their bathroom bills were overturned? And I wish I could tell all of you right now that when the President of the United States of America tweeted that he thought trans people were not even worthy of serving in his military, that his hatred and bigotry did not leak and seep across our borders and into the minds of some in this country, but I cannot tell you that. That is not my experience. I wish I could tell you that when the same president tweeted just last October, weeks ago, that his administration intends to erase trans people by denying our right to exist in our own personal documents, by narrowly defining gender as fixed and determined by birth. I wish I could tell you that it didn't literally make my blood run cold with fear straight into my own heart. Because if I don't exist on paper, then there are no laws anywhere on paper that can protect me. So please remember this. The next time you are tempted to dismiss the gender-neutral bathroom or change room issue in your workplace as just a very small minority clamoring for special treatment at the cost of the majority, I just ask you to please remember me standing here to tell you my very human story. And I tell myself that most of these changes are well within our reach and our budgets. Sometimes, in some cases, it is as simple as removing a sign on the door and putting up a new sign. And for the budget-minded people, good news is you can reuse the same 4 screws, people. You can reuse the screws. Okay? I tell myself that the reason all of this hasn't changed already is that most people just don't ever think about it because the world has not made you think about it yet. Not because you don't care. So I'd like to just make one thing perfectly clear. Trans people are not asking for a special washroom, because here's the deal. If a public building only has gendered washrooms, what that actually means in real life, for me, in my real life, is that women and girls have a special bathroom and men and boys have a special bathroom. Most of the time, everybody but trans people have a special bathroom, and it's not even a special bathroom. We all have gender-neutral bathrooms at home. What do we call them? We call them bathrooms. It's not a special bathroom. You can use it. You can use it. You can use it. You too, sir, you can use it. You can all use it, just maybe not at the same time. We'd have to work out a system. You're all welcome in there. Trans people would never keep anyone out of a bathroom or a change room because of their gender or what kind of clothes they're wearing or how long or short their hair is. I mean, seriously, what kind of an asshole would do something like that? But I do want you to know that trans people, we do not get up in the morning and make menacing steeple shapes with our unusually long and graceful fingers, although we often do have unusually long and graceful fingers, but we don't get up and do this and then plot up new and creative ways to throw a sparkle-encrusted wrench into the engine room of your perfectly tuned gender binary. We really don't do that. We are just trying to go to school or go swimming or go to work without being confronted or hassled or made to feel physically unsafe, just about like you. And to all the women in the audience, We all know that gender binary is not so finely tuned anyway, don't we? So where should we start? There's so much we need to change, but let's just start with language. I identify with definitions, okay? I identify as a non-binary trans person. I am transgender, which is an umbrella term for people whose gender identity and/or gender expression differ from what is typically associated with the gender they were assigned at birth. I am not a transgender, any more than it would be appropriate to call someone a black or a Chinese. It sounds racist because it's racist. Okay? I am a trans person. I am not transgendered. There is no such word as transgendered, just as most of you are not maled or femaled. So you're maled, eh? Have you always been maled? Just like you were totally just maled when you were... Anyway. I am a trans person. Another term you've probably heard is transsexual. Transsexual, to me, it's an older term that originated in the medical and psychological communities. It didn't originate in the trans community. It's still preferred, though, by some people who've permanently changed or seek to change their bodies through medical interventions, including but not limited to hormones and/or surgeries. Unlike transgender, transsexual is not an umbrella term. Many transgender people do not identify as transsexual and prefer the word transgender. It is best to just ask someone, like privately, like maybe not in front of, 1,100 people, but just like privately ask them which term they prefer. And again, please use it as an adjective, a transsexual woman or a transsexual man, please, not a transsexual. One last term is cisgender. C-I-S-G-E-N-D-E-R comes from the Latin prefix on the same side as. It's an adjective denoting or relating to someone whose sense of personal identity corresponds with the gender assigned to them at birth. It's used to classify someone who is not trans, using language that does not further other trans people. You can use the word cisgender instead of saying things like, oh, you trans people, and then all the normal people, or regular people, or my least favorite, biological. Oh, you're a biological woman. Oh, but see, biological actually means carbon-based. We're all carbon-based. Cisgender. These are just very basic terms. And let's get back to action. Let's just talk about pronouns. Everybody got a little thing. You get to put a little sticker. No big deal, right? For most of us. It's hard for me to describe to you, though, to those of you who have always felt comfortable and seen in the gender box you were placed in at birth, what it feels like when someone consistently on purpose refers to you by the wrong pronoun. I'm not talking about a mistake. I'm talking about people who don't care if they make mistakes. I'm talking about people who do it on purpose or who refuse to acknowledge or respect someone in that way, okay? It's not enough for me to just ask the men in the room, what would it feel like to constantly be called a lady? Or for the women in the room to imagine being called sir when you were all dressed up for a day at work. If you have not struggled to fit into and or escape from your assigned gender box, then you cannot truly know what this feels like. But if passing as your chosen gender has never been a matter of safety or danger for you, if it's never been a matter of being respected or reviled, then you cannot and will not truly understand me, but I will attempt to describe it to you right now anyway, okay? I'd like you to imagine a world full of strangers who all have a little tiny little razor in their hand, and they can sort of shave a tiny little piece of your soul off you while they sell you a newspaper or pass you the key to the bathroom at the gas station, okay? Now imagine that your coworkers have an even bigger blade, and they can cut deeper, right? Now imagine your friends and family members and your boss or your management, they wield a really big knife. Imagine that all of these cuts can whittle away at the flesh of you day after day, rendering the truth of you into just a sliver, almost invisible, unrecognizable. Imagine that these cuts sting for hours afterwards, sometimes days, and that they tend to fester, yeah? Now imagine that you have to get through every day, just bleeding from hundreds of little wounds all the time, some little and some deep, all the while pretending that nothing hurts, that it's okay, that it's no big deal, or you are the snowflake. Me, I want to phase out this term, this use of the term preferred pronoun or prefers the pronoun. I want to replace it with uses the pronoun. I prefer chicken to duck. I prefer a window or an aisle seat, but I use the pronoun they. That is what I use. That is what you call me. When someone writes that a person prefers a particular pronoun, it infers that there is a choice there for everyone, whether to respect that wish or not, and that the person with the pronoun preference would be okay with the middle seat or the duck of their identity being respected and honored. But this is not true. For some, if not most, gender variant and or trans folks, not having our pronoun respected is hurtful. Constantly correcting people gets exhausting, gets alienating. It's like they're standing and talking to someone next to you. They're talking about someone that looks like you, sorta, but isn't really. So I vow to change my language. People don't prefer their chosen pronoun, they use it. My only choice in the matter is to be mindful and respectful of others, or to be thoughtless and even cruel, or maybe even out someone or put them in danger. This is not to say that I get it right all the time, every time, but that's what I aim for. I aim for getting it right all the time, every time. And saying things like, oh, but I find it so hard to remember because I've known her as a she, like for the last 15 years we've been working. No, that is a cop-out, okay? It's just a cop-out. If you have a real connection to someone, if you have a real connection to that person, then you owe it to them to do better by them. This is what I tell people. If you're unsure which pronoun someone uses, find a private moment and simply ask them. Trust me, any bit of awkwardness that might ensue is far outweighed by the pain that repeatedly misgendering that person might cause them, especially if they look up to you, especially if they depend on you as their union rep or their shop steward. They're counting on you to make sure their rights are being respected on the job. They're counting on you to advocate on their behalf with the employer. So I just ask everyone to try harder to get a person's pronoun right. And if or when, probably when you do make a mistake, simply apologize and move on. I ask anyone with power or influence or seniority in a workplace to remember that how they deal with a coworker or a colleague changing their name or pronoun is a model for how all the rest of the staff will respond, and that if the shop steward doesn't appear to be making an effort to get it right, certainly no one else will. Trans people exist, regardless of what Trump says, or Jonathan Kay, or Jordan Peterson, or Doug Ford. We're coming out younger and more often, emboldened. We're emboldened by the changes we can see and hear and feel in the world around us. So the world's only choice is to learn and grow and make the change that needs to happen, or be on the wrong side of history and to fail people that came to us in search of something as vital as keeping a decent job, a job that provides them with a living wage and health benefits. I just spent all of November in Southeast Asia, and I listened and met with and talked to LGBTQ activists in 8 different countries and 9 cities. It was incredible. And I thought it would be so different, but it's not. We're still fighting the same battles. The timeline just looks different from country to country, and some of the little details and the nuances are different from country to country. So I just want to note a couple of things, especially when working with a trans person who has just come out or is at the very beginning of their physical or medical transition. They might not physically look like what you assume a trans person is supposed to look like. Medical transition especially involves wait times and wait lists and delays and time off work to heal and money, lots of money. And all of this takes time to save up. For many trans people, the process of medically transitioning is extremely difficult in terms of maintaining steady employment. The unemployment rate among trans people, especially while transitioning, is staggering. Paying for hormone treatments and electrolysis and surgeries that are often not covered, and buying an entirely new wardrobe, all of that adds up. It takes time to save up for. So people sometimes delay transitioning for all of these reasons. This does not mean they're any less trans just because they don't look like they are to you. It does not mean they're experiencing any less pain or dysphoria. And I got to tell you, the textbook definition of trans means that your body doesn't match your brain. That's what they always say. You know, your body doesn't match your brain. I don't buy this. I feel like it's a very handy narrative. I've never really related to this body doesn't match my brain. This is the only brain and the only body I'm ever gonna have. And they match just fine. I feel like this body doesn't match your brain. It's a handy narrative that puts all of the pressure and responsibility for change onto trans people and off of the rest of society. You know, if we could just grow a beard or not have a penis or an Adam's apple, if we were shorter or taller or skinnier or hairier or less hairy, if our breasts were bigger or removed, if we could take and pay for and heal up from all the steps we would need to go through so that none of you could tell anymore that we were trans. Yeah, if we could just fit a little better. If we could just fit neatly into one of two rigidly defined gender boxes, then we could be happy. I do not accept this very common theory, and please do not mishear me. This is not to say I do not support, I fully support the right of each and every trans or non-binary person out there to do what and how and whatever they need to do to feel comfortable in this vessel, just like I support that right for everyone. But my day-to-day struggles are not so much between me and my body anymore. I'm not trapped in the wrong body. I'm trapped in a world that makes very little space for bodies like mine. I live in a world where my trans sisters are routinely murdered without consequence or justice. I live in a world where trans youth get kicked out on the regular, out onto the street by their own parents, some of them who think that their own God is standing behind them as they close their front doors behind their own children. Going to the beach is an act of bravery for me. None of this is a battle between me and my own flesh. No. For me to be free, it is the world that needs to change, not trans people. We're already professionals at changing. Just going to tell you one other little quick story here. A couple of years ago, I got a request from a stranger via my Facebook account Her name was Carrie, and she asked me if I'd be willing to help her out. She worked as a mathematician at a high-tech startup firm that employed about 140 people, she said, mostly men. And she had been assigned male at birth and was still in the closet at work about being trans in her professional life. But she was ready now, finally, to come out, tell the truth to her coworkers and her company. She told me she had been suffering lately more and more and more every day from gender dysphoria, exacerbated by having to dress up and pretend to be a man from Monday to Friday every week. And she was having anxiety, nearly panic attacks from worrying about being spotted by one of her coworkers out, dressed as her real self, outside of work hours. She wanted me to come into her workplace and do a Trans 101 seminar for her mostly male co-workers, specifically to explain to them that even though she was trans, she didn't want to be a Caitlyn Jenner kind of trans person, trans woman, that she wanted her name and pronoun to be respected, but she didn't necessarily want to have to wear full makeup and manicure and a ball gown every day to the office in order to be accepted as who she was, to be respected as who she was. She was a mathematician, she said, a practical and a pragmatic person. She just wanted a safe washroom to use in an accessible location to her workstation, and she wanted to keep her job. She wanted to wear clothes she could work comfortably in, and she wanted to, get this, she wanted to be paid the same as her male coworkers. You know us trans people just wanting all the things all the time. You know, the very same conditions all women deserve and have fought and continue to fight for. She wanted me to be the one to field the possibly invasive and potentially hurtful or offensive questions that might follow my presentation. Preferably, she had it all planned out when she was out of the room, she said, because she had to go back to work with those dudes on Monday. So she was going to be out of the room, she said. She wanted to provide an opportunity for her coworkers to educate themselves in an environment where she would not have to bear all the brunt of that education. She wanted me to teach them, so that she could insulate herself from feeling overly tender or resentful from riding their learning curves when she returned to work on Monday morning. She was smart, that Carrie, the mathematician. She said she was just going to run it all by her HR department, but they were on board, and she would get back to me to confirm a date. And then she called me on the phone a couple of days later in tears. Her HR department had talked to their legal department, and together they had decided on a much different approach. The folks in legal had contacted their insurance company, yeah? And the insurance company was sending someone in, not a trans person, a lawyer, to do a seminar with all of her coworkers on how not to get charged with sexual harassment and how to conduct oneself in the workplace so as not to risk the cost and inconvenience to the company of any kind of lawsuit or human rights complaint. True story. So instead of bringing in an actual human trans person to help educate her management and coworkers as to how to support and respect her during an already stressful time in her personal and professional life, her company was choosing to send in a lawyer to scare her coworkers into complying with government policy in the workplace to cover their own asses. Carrie also told me that her manager had made it painfully clear to her that her position at the company was not as solid and safe as she had previously thought it was, and that the whole experience had revealed to her that she no longer felt like her HR department was on her side at all, nor did she feel like her management team would come to her aid should the almost inevitable hassles arise with any of her 140 mostly straight, mostly male coworkers. She was so upset and scared by the whole experience that she had decided not to come out at work at all for the time being. Her biggest hope now was that no one in management that she had come out to so far would gossip and tell her coworkers about her being trans. Carrie chose continued dysphoria and ever-increasing anxiety over the truth because she felt that was her safer option, and her company chose fear and intimidation over education and compassion because they felt that was their safest option. These kinds of stories are not hard to come by. This kind of hassle and inconvenience is not uncommon in the lives of trans and gender variant people. We all have stories like this, but many of these problems could be solved with education and a commitment from people like us to do better. So again, I offer up my thanks and gratitude for all of those who are responsible for bringing me here today to speak to all of you. Thank you. Oh, I'm not done. Hold on. I'm not done. I didn't start till 4:28, people. Sit your asses back down. I'm just wrapping this shit up. Okay. Sit down, Irene. You had your turn. Just kidding. Who's paying for me? You are. You are. It's time's time, though. Just kidding. We're all just kidding, everybody. Okay. For trans people, this kind of basic respect and dignity can be an actual lifesaver. It's not hyperbole, a lifesaver. It can mean the difference between quitting that job or staying, between sticking it out or leaving, or in the worst case scenario, opting out of life altogether. It is hard to measure transphobia. It's illegal in this country to keep someone from accessing an education or keep someone from being employed because they are trans, but it is easy to make our work environment so hostile and potentially unsafe that we cannot tolerate it anymore. I've heard too many of these stories. Let's all step it up, people. Okay? I want us to reframe the conversation and move away from the mindset of, oh shit, now we have a trans employee or member. What are we going to have to do now to accommodate them? And start to look at things differently. Challenge each other to come up with the answers to the questions of minority or marginalized workers before they even need to ask us. I believe in us. I believe in you. I'm just going to close with one more little story. A few years ago, I had the very great fortune to be invited to a writers' festival, and I said yes to that writers' festival, even though it was going to be in Campbell River, and I'd already been to Campbell River, and I didn't really want to go back to Campbell River, but I said yes to Campbell River because I heard that my friend and fellow writer Richard Wagamese was going to be there. May he rest in peace. I had met him years ago at another storytelling festival. We had recognized each other immediately as heart-born storytellers always do, and Richard and I, he was a walker, and the venue where all the gigs were happening was about 5 kilometers down the beautiful beach there from where we were staying in a little motel. So there was a shuttle going back and forth, but Richard said, no, we're going to walk. And so we did. We walked each day, him and I, back and forth, 5 or 6 kilometers one way from the motel to the venue or home, and we talked. And I'm grateful for those hours we spent now because he is no longer with us. And he was the only First Nations writer at that festival. And I was the only trans person there as a writer or even as an audience member, as far as I could tell or feel. But you can't always tell or feel. But anyway, there was no gender-neutral bathroom at the venue as per usual. And on the very first night, just before I went on, like a minute and a half before I went on, I got screeched at by a woman in the women's bathroom, just minutes before I had to step on a giant stage. And I sold that very same woman from the bathroom a book right after the show. Just took her $20. Slid her a book. Neither of us mentioned the incident in the bathroom to each other. Anyhow, Richard and I had been programmed together for an event on the very closing night. We were supposed to interview each other and do a short reading. And I said, when we were walking that morning, I said, don't you think that's weird, Richard? Like, it's no coincidence, right? That they stuck the only First Nations guy and the only trans person together at the end, right? That's like not a coincidence, right? It's like some diversity panel or something like that, right? He said, no coincidence at all, Coyote. But who else will tell our stories but us? I would far rather be interviewed by someone who has at least some mirrored experience of being the other, of being the only one, always the only one in the room. I'm glad It will be you asking me questions tonight, fellow misfit, fellow ambassador, fellow teacher. Our job is to see this as an honor, not a chore. That will make us so much better at it. I remember the day I finally worked up the courage to go in and ask the librarian in the Whitehorse Public Library if she knew of any books about gay people. I was 13. It was 1982. I was searching for someone's version of my own story, and I was scared to ask her because my grandma worked as a bookbinder at the library, and I thought she'd tell my grandma what the books, so I was just trying to make a no big deal. So I asked her for a bunch of stuff. I think I actually asked her for books about spontaneous human combustion, sharks, giraffes, outer space, and homosexuality, just so the gay books part wouldn't stick out so much. She smiled. She disappeared into the back stacks for a while. She came back with a book in her hands. She looked embarrassed, maybe. Was that what it was? I'm sorry, she said. This is the only book we have on homosexuality right now. We have tons of stuff on sharks and giraffes and outer space. You know where it is. Spontaneous human combustion. You can mostly only find that in the magazine index. And the one book she handed me was a novel. It was called The Well of Loneliness by Radcliffe Hall. The main character dies in the end. I do not recommend it for any struggling queer youth that you may know. The mainstream loves a trans story these days, but it has to be a certain kind of trans story, right? But I am tired of the well of loneliness. I don't want to watch Only Boys Don't Cry or The Crying Game, or any movie with crying in the title about trans people. I'm done. I don't want to watch the documentary of the life and unsolved death of yet another trans woman of color. I wish that trans activist Marsha P. Johnson was still alive here today to tell us her own story. But maybe Netflix wouldn't be so interested if she were. And I know we need these stories of struggle and sweat and fear and adversity and how we fought the good fight. Of course, we need these stories, but it is also time to write some new stories of full employment, of medical benefits, of joy and triumph and love and acceptance and inclusion, stories of family and redemption. The very same stories, I believe, all people need to hear, but starring my people this time, written by us, written for us, written about us. Here's my plan. I have a plan. One day, I am going to write a very true story about a very old trans person. Very old. My grandma Pat lived to be 99. That's why I quit smoking and I drink lots of water. I turned 50 this summer. I very well might be only halfway there. So I'm going to write a story about a very old trans person, and I want it to be a long and very boring kind of story where the only pain is in my ancient bones, and the biggest struggle of my day is how I'm going to get that gravy boat down from that weird cupboard up above the refrigerator. How am I going to do that? Because I'm having a giant dinner party. The family's all coming over, and we will eat that giant dinner, and then we will push all the plates aside. And one of the kids will say, "Ivan, tell us a story." And so I will. Thank you very much. Have a really great rest of your conference. Thank you, thank you.
Just stay right here, okay? Yep, stay right here for a sec. We're going to give you a really boring book. Oh, cool. Yeah, that's it right there.